Hello there. Today's episode is entitled Cirklon, Accumulator, Supplemental, Informational, Video Message. The title's probably a bit too long, but I'm sticking to it. I will be going through the last group of aux events that I didn't cover in the previous brief video because I didn't want the video to not be brief. So we're going to be going through the Accumulator aux events. There's quite a few of them, and I think they're the most complicated of the aux events. So that's why I decided to do a video dedicated to just those. Get a little bit tricky sometimes, a little bit complicated, the things that I'm showing you. But just bear with me and try to do some of the examples yourself. And you'll figure it out in no time. I'm getting hypnotized by seeing all these mini messages. Let's get on with it, alright? Before we get started on the accumulators, I have some news for you. And the news is that you're going to have to update your firmware again. I'm sorry, it's kind of my fault. While I was going through the accumulators, I found a bug or two, which Colin has fixed. He fixed it as soon as I told him about it. So, in order to get the accumulators working properly while you're watching my video, you need to update the firmware, otherwise you'll probably spot a bug. Also, Colin has added an amazing new feature which would have really helped me during my last 3.5 hour aux event video. And it's this feature right here I'm just going to show you before we push off. So right now I've got Rndmz auxB, but I put it into auxC row by accident, like an idiot, because I am an idiot. But there's a new feature. Hold down Shift and press row, and now I have an option to move the aux to a different row. So I want to move it to auxA, swap it there. There we go, now it's working. So, once again, move to your row, Shift row, and you can pick the other aux to move it to. Very, very useful. So update your firmware, and once you do, we can continue with the accumulators. The first thing we're going to have a look at is the P3. Let's go into our P3 pattern. And I just have some notes set up here, 4 notes. SH101. We're going to go into the P3 edit menu by pressing the menu button. And here we see some useful information to do with the accumulators. Now, before we continue, I just want to point out, first step, on resync, sync, apply FTS, aux macro. They have nothing to do with accumulators, okay? We're not interested in them. Watch my previous videos to figure out what they all do. I covered all of them in the P3 video. But what we're interested in is the information in this window here, and also this menu at the end. So, what are accumulators? Each P3 pattern has 3 accumulators, and what they are is they're just values, they're numbers. And there's one for note, there's one for velocity, and there's one for auxD. And every time you press play on the Cirklon, these are set to 0. And unless you mess with them, they're always going to be 0. So they normally don't do anything unless you specifically make them do something. And what they do is they offset the value of this. So note 1 offsets the note value, the velocity one offsets velocity, and the auxD one offsets the value of auxD, whatever is on auxD. So what does that mean? Well, I'll show you. So let's go back to our notes here. And we're gonna go into the accumulator aux menu, and we see quite a few here. And the first one we're gonna have a look at is offset note absolute. I'm gonna put that here, and we're gonna turn it on, and we're gonna set the value to 2. Now, you hear what just happened? The whole pattern, all the notes in the pattern, have been transposed by 2 semitones, up 2, plus 2. If we go back into our accumulator menu, we'll see that note has plus 2 after it. We've changed the accumulator to plus 2, and the note accumulator will change every note that's in the P3 pattern. It's just one accumulator. It's not one per step, it's just one per pattern. But we can change it per step if we want, but it's the same number. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So let's add some more notes there. So they're the same notes. We're gonna go down to our row, and on step 1 we have plus 2, and step 9 I'm gonna go plus 5. So you can hear and you can see I'm changing the accumulator value mid-pattern just to change the note transpose. So it's going up to plus 5 now. That can be minus as well. Let's put it to minus 2. And we can see in the accumulator menu, it's going plus 2 this step, minus 2 in that step. So, well, I just turned that one off. There we go. Okay. So that's basically what it does. The accumulator just adds a number to the note accumulator, and this changes the note, transposes the note. So obviously, because it's an aux event, you can have some fun with it. What do I always like to do? I'll randomize. So we're going to go randomize auxB. I'm going to change this to 30. So now if we look at this, the first step is going to be randomized between 0 and 30. The second, step 9 isn't. So step 9 is always going to be, oh, I didn't need to turn that on. Step 9 is always going to be minus 2. Now the next aux event we're going to look at is in the accumulator menu. And it's down here, it's called note accumulator defeat. And what this does is it stops the accumulator affecting the note of the pattern. So I can turn that on for these 3 notes. And what's happening there is these 3 notes are not going to be changed by the accumulator. They're going to stay as they originally are that I programmed here. So they're going to be D, D sharp, and then G. But all the other notes that I didn't put the defeat on, that I didn't activate it on, so note 1 and then 9, 10, 11, 12, they'll still be affected by the accumulator. So that's the offset note absolute and the note accumulator defeat. Okay, we're back to our regular SH101 pattern that's not ascending or changing, but we're going to make it change with the next accumulator we're going to look at, which is offset note relative. So this is almost like offset note absolute. Absolute sets the value. Relative, we're adding or subtracting to the accumulator. And I'll show you how that works now. We've added it here, offset note relative, and I'm gonna change this to 3. And let's go into our accumulator menu, and you'll notice every time that step plays, it adds 3 to the note accumulator, so it just keeps going up. Will it go up forever? No, it won't go up forever. You'll notice that it got to 33 and a third almost, and then it reset to 0. So this is a good time to look at the accumulator config, because that's where you set this up. So let's go into this accumulator config screen, and you can see we've got 3 rows for note, velocity, and auxD. Let's have a look at the note one first. We have accumulator note, we have limit 35, we have mode Rtz, and out we have rclip. So what do these mean? Limit 35, that's the maximum number that the accumulator will go up to. So I'm adding to it each time. It gets to 30, 33. Now the next number would have been 36. But what happens is it gets to the limit, which into the accumulator config, it gets to the limit 35, and then it does whatever is in mode. And mode is Rtz. Rtz means reset to 0. So we'll see that happening. The note will reset to 0 once it gets to the limit. Let's show you a different setup here. We'll put one. I'm gonna turn on every single step, and I'm going to turn on my other notes just so we can hear it happening and we can see it better. So I have the accumulator now set to +1 on every single step. So you can see it's going up faster now. So every time a note plays, it's being transposed by this value. And you can see it goes to 35 and then resets to 0. So if I change the limit to say 50, we'll hear it go higher. There we go. And it goes to 50 and then gets reset to 0. So, what other options have we got? So in mode, we have a few more options. We have, this is reset to 0, which we've seen. Then we have clip. And what clip does is, it starts, when it gets to the limit, it just stays at the limit. So you'll notice there, when I stopped and started, resets to 0, goes up to the limit, which is 50, stays at the limit. So the note will stay there. So let's go into the accumulator config again, and after clip, let's just turn that off for a sec because it's annoying me. We have Rvtz, which is reverse to 0. So let's turn this down so it doesn't get so high. Let's turn it to 32. So what's going to happen now? Goes up, up, up to 32, then it starts going down to 0, and then it goes up again to 32. So I have it advancing on every step, the accumulator, but we don't have to have it advance on every step. We can make it go on, just turn some of these off. And I just have it all set to 1 just so we see it go up kind of slower, just so you can see it easier. So you can see it's going up slower now because not every step advances it. So that's the reverse to 0. And there's one final mode, which is RVBP. That's reverse bipolar. And what that means is, let's start it again. It starts at 0, it's going up. Our limit is 32. Hits 32, starts going down. But now it's reverse bipolar. So it goes down to 0, but it goes past to minus 32, minus whatever the limit was. So you can see now the notes are going minus. It's transposing it down. So it gets pretty low, probably lower than my synth is set up for. But we don't have to have it go so low. I just wanted to show you. And it's going up again. So that's the accumulator config. That's the important options. The limit and the mode are important. We'll get to rclip later. Okay, Shouldn't start with OK, should I? We've already looked at offset note, absolute and relative. Next is offset velocity, absolute and relative. I'm going to skip over that one because it works exactly the same way as offset note, absolute and relative, except it just changes the velocity. So we don't need to look at that. The next ones we're going to look at are offset auxD, absolute and relative. The offset auxD accumulator is a little bit trickier. There's more to it than the note and the velocity one. So we're going to have a more in-depth look at this. So first of all, let's just see what I've got set up here. I've got some notes, 3 notes, just plain different notes. And on aux row C, I've got aux note relative set up. And also on aux row D, I've got aux note relative set up. And they're giving me my extra 2 notes of polyphony. So note that I've got one of these on aux row D, and we're going to be using the accumulator offset auxD absolute. So that's going to affect what's on auxD. Remember that. So we're going to set this to 1. Hear what happened there? What happened there is, let's look at the accumulator menu. The auxD accumulator is now +1. And what that is doing is it's adding 1 to my +7 aux note relative. So my chord is being changed. The higher note in the chord is being changed. And if I keep adding to it, it'll add that number. It'll just move it up semitones. And I can go down minus as well. Right there, it's the same as one of the other notes, so we're not going to hear it. So we can change it like that, and also it's an aux event, so we can randomize it. We can randomize aux, where am I, auxD, yeah. Turn that on. Let's have a look at what's happening. We can see here. I'm just randomizing it on one step, just to make it easier for you to see. But you could put changes on any step you want and randomize it much faster. So we can see auxD being randomized. And it's being randomized. I've set it to -11, but then I'm randomizing it +6. So the range isn't that massive. We can see it there. So that is the offset auxD absolute. Let's just turn that off and turn that off. Let's get rid of the randomize just to make things cleaner. And now we're going to look at offset auxD relative. I'm going to put this to 1. I'm just going to stop I'm not going to put it there actually. I'm going to put it down the end, very last step, and I'm going to have a +1 there. Turn it on. So let's have a look what happens. If I press play, it resets to 0. Now it's +1, +2. It's going to keep accumulating because I've set it up so plus is 1 every time. I can make it go up faster, or I can make it go down. And let's look at the accumulator config. And you can see my auxD row. I've set the limit to 12. And I set it to RTZ, which means reset to 0. So when it gets, we heard it just there. When it gets to 12, it resets back to 0. I put +12 because it's an octave up, but you can pick anything you want, obviously. Let's make this +3, and it'll count up quicker. It'll be +3 every time. And it gets to the limit, and it resets to 0. Just like the other ones, you can have it clip, which means it'll just stay. It'll stay at 12 now. Oh, no it didn't. Why not? Because I have to stop it and start it. Oh no, because I set velocity to clip and not accumulator. There we go. So I've set accumulator to limit. Let's go back here and have a look now. You always have to keep your eye on the ball with this. So it reaches the limit at plus 12. Thank God it did it that time. See? I know what I'm doing, kind of. And we can make it reverse. So it goes from 0 to 12 and then back to 0. And also there's bipolar as well, which make it go to 0 to 12, then down to minus 12, and back to 0 to 12 again. You can see it's going down there. In this example, I just wanted to quickly show you the auxD defeat. Just like the node offset and the velocity offset, you can defeat the auxD offset as well. So currently what's happening here is I've got auxD set up to send CC to the filter of the Nord lead, and you can see this is affecting the filter cutoff. You can hear it and you can see it. And I've got my offset auxD relative with +1 in every step. That's what's making the accumulator go up. Every step +1. Goes to a maximum of 35, then it resets to 0. But I don't want that to happen on every step. Go to accumulator. We go to auxD accumulator defeat. And you just set these on. And you can hear the aux accumulator is not affecting 9 to 16. For 9 to 16, it's just going back to 0, which are my settings here on the auxD row. You can still see the accumulator goes up. It doesn't stop going up. It just doesn't affect aux row D when it's defeated. If you try it yourself and play around with it, you'll get a good idea of how it works. The accumulators have one other option here. I'll go into accumulator config, and this one here, ROPS, which means reset on pattern select. Let me explain what that means. With this following example, we're going to go to step 16, and I'm going to set the accumulator offset node absolute, and I'm going to set it to +20, turn it on. It adds 20 semitones, which we can obviously hear, and we can see as well, node +20. Now, every time you start the Cirklon playing, it resets all the accumulators to 0. But my step just set it to +20 there. So, starting the Cirklon resets all the accumulators to 0. Let's change this. Turn that off. Okay, so let's actually just reload. So we're back to our normal pattern with no transpose, and we have reset on pattern select on. So if we go to another pattern, this one's called -20. This has no notes or anything, but it has an accumulator to set the note to -20. The note accumulator to -20. It doesn't do anything else. So the accumulator is currently -20. If I go back to my original pattern, the accumulator is 0. It reset to 0 when I selected this pattern. We can change that happening. We turn this off. Save our pattern. Go to our -20. Let's have a look at the accumulator. -20 in the note. Let's go back to our other pattern. You hear it's still at minus 20. And you can see it's still at minus 20. It didn't reset to 0 because we have ROPS turned off and saved in this pattern. So that's what ROPS does. P.S. It's amazing. Those of you familiar with my videos will know that I love using the random mask gate to stop notes playing every so often. So let's say I have these notes here down the end, and I don't want them to play all the time, so we're gonna randomize random mask gate, and so now there's a 50% chance that each of these notes will play. The problem here though is that the random mask gate is randomizing each step itself with its own random, each step gets its own random number. So in some cases I want this group of notes to be on and off 50% of the time, all together. And random mask gate can't do that unless you do some fancy redirects. There's an easier way though, and the easier way is this. What we're gonna do is we're gonna change this, and we're gonna go to, instead of random mask gate, we're gonna go to accumulator mask. And we're gonna use the very first accumulator mask here. Aha. What is this doing? Well, what this is doing is it's masking the gate, which is not letting the gate play, as in the note doesn't play, unless the auxD accumulator is greater than n, and n is this number I've set here, which is 50. Now, the auxD accumulator is 0, so auxD accumulator is less than 50, so these notes are not going to play. So now I've grouped these notes, so I can make these turn on and off using, let's go to B, accumulator, and we go to offset auxD. We're going to go to absolute first, just to show you. The notes are not going to play until this is over 50. Currently, you can see it's 24. I'm just turning it up here. Let's go to 49. Now we're at 50. We're hearing the notes because auxD accumulator is 50, and in here I've set this so all these notes will only play if the auxD accumulator is 50 or more. So now I can randomize aux row B. So let's put this down to 0 again. So we're not going to hear any note. I've changed the aux value to the offset to 0, but we're going to randomize it so it goes from possible 0 to possible 100. So every time this is 50 or more, these notes will play. And every time it's less than 50, these notes won't play. And you can see it here. 17, not gonna play. 17 again, not gonna play. 100, gonna play. There. So that's how you group sets of notes that you want to random mask gate together. They don't all have to be beside each other. I just use these ones down at the end as an example. And what's interesting is you can play around with this as well. They don't all have to be 50. What if I want this to only play when it's above 80, or only play when it's above 90, and this one to only play when it's above 70, and this one's 60. So there's more chance of these playing, and then there's less chance of this, and even less chance of these playing. See the accumulator again. Listen out. None of them. Almost all of them. Yeah, all of them. of them because it's 100. None of them. And so on. So that's really powerful for random masking groups of notes together. And there's a couple in here. So the next one is almost the same. It's just the opposite. It's mask the gate unless the number I've picked, n, is greater than the accumulator. So now, when this is 100, none of these will play. When this is 90, this one will play. And when it's 70, these two will play. When it's 60, these three will play. And when it's 50 or less, they'll all play. Let's have a look. Yeah, you can see that's happening. Remember, I have auxD disconnected, but this is still working. You don't need to have the values go into auxD for it to work. So that's the first two of those. The second two are the same, but instead of gate, it's just tie. So let's have a look at that. Because I've got it. I don't have any ties set up. Let's set them up. There, you hear the tie. Not all the time though. Let's set them all to 50 to make it easier to hear. So when it's over 50, my tie plays. When it's under 50, my tie does not play. And you can hear that if you listen carefully. There. Yeah, we heard it there. So the second one, tie, is greater than, and also there's a less than. I don't need to do that one as well. Then the next are the same as mask, except they're not masking the gate, they're masking aux rows. So let's set up an example of that. Now we're going to look at the mask aux row mask accumulator. It's worth remembering that these are not random masks. These are masks that work off the accumulator. And it's also worth noting that when you're reading these, see the comma? The comma means unless. So I've already explained the mask gate, and from that we deduce what mask tie does. And we should also know now what mask auxB, if mask auxB unless accumulator is greater than or equal to n, or mask auxB unless n is greater than the accumulator. They're just the opposite. And it's the same too for mask C. So I don't need to explain mask B because we're going to do mask C. It's the same thing. It's just a different row. It's masking. So we're going to select this one, which is mask auxC, stop auxC playing, unless n, which is this value here in the mask B row, unless n is greater than the accumulator. So what does that mean? And what's going to happen? Well, on row C, I've set up set MIDI channel aux event. And for most of my steps, for 1 to 15, I have it going to my Nord rack 2x. And on step 16, it's going to the SH101. So you can see that here. Don't mind the numbers. The numbers are not the MIDI channel. The MIDI channel is represented on the step row. So host output 2 MIDI channel 1, and on the last one it's CV channel 3 for the SH101. So the Nord is going to play for 15 steps, and then the SH101 is going to play for 1 step at the end. However, as the accumulator goes up, what's going to happen is this row is going to start masking this row. So my set MIDI channel, when it gets to the end, every time it's going to set the MIDI channel to the SH101. But when it gets to the start, it sets it to the Nord again. But once these start getting masked, it's not going to set it back to the Nord. It's going to leave it at the SH101 until it gets to a higher step because I've set it so the accumulator is going to start working on these ones first, and then as the accumulator goes up, the value of the accumulator gets higher, it'll start working on these. So let's have a listen to what that sounds like by unmuting the track. You hear the SH101 coming in, and you hear more SH101 as the pattern goes on, and we can see the accumulator going up. All SH101 almost now, and then back to 0 because I've set that up in accumulator config. Also, here's another thing. This is the auxD accumulator, so the mask auxC is getting its value from the auxD accumulator, but also the auxD accumulator is sending its value to the auxD row, and I've got the auxD row sending CC to the node on control channel 33, and that's what's pitch bending slightly the oscillator. So you can hear the node, it sounds like there's an LFO on the oscillator, but it's actually this control channel. They're all set to 0, but they're all set on, so the accumulator gets added to it. So the accumulator is doing two things at the same time here, which is pretty cool, I think, if I don't say so myself. So that's the mask. It can be very good for morphing patterns. If you want to change the pattern as it's going on. I'll show you another example of that right now. We're going to have a look at another morphing example using the accumulator. You can hear on this pattern I have a funky 80s electro style SH101 pattern set up. I have every note playing. Remember that, every note is on, and I'm going up and down just different octaves of E. So let's turn that off. That's on track 6. And then we're going to go to track 7. Track 7 is where the magic is. And we're going to have a look at this pattern, and I'm going to explain it before I turn it on. So first of all, I have on aux row A, I have offset auxD relative. That's just going to increase auxD accumulator by 1, and it's on for every step. Now you'll notice if we go in, the accumulator is not increasing. That's because the pattern is muted. It's not playing, so the accumulator won't increase yet until I turn this on. It's one thing to note with the accumulators. One of the many things to note. On aux row B, we have mask aux row C unless the accumulator is greater than or equal to n. And n is the value on each of these steps that I've got set up. I've got a kind of a slope going. It starts at 48 and it goes up to 127 at the end. And then on aux row C, I've got grab all from track 6. And that's going to grab all the note values, but also the gate, which notes are on and off from track 6, which has all the notes on, and it's going to play them on track 7. We know how the grab aux event works. Watch my previous 3-hour video for that. It's in there somewhere. So what's going to happen here is while the aux is going up, this mask auxC is going to stop masking as the aux number increases, and when it stops masking this row, this is going to grab the note information from the other track. So let's look at it and listen to it in action. I'm going to have a look at it. This is pattern 7. I'm starting to hear pattern 6 now. As the accumulator goes up, and I've set it up so when it gets to the max, which is 127, it goes down again. The accumulator steadily goes down. And we hear less of pattern 6 and more of pattern 7. So let's just have another look at this row. When the accumulator first goes over 48, then we'll hear this note being grabbed from track 6, and then as the accumulator goes up more and more of the notes are going to grab from track 6. Until when the accumulator gets to 127, every single note gets grabbed from track 6. And then it'll go down again and less notes will get grabbed again. So, good idea maybe is just look at my settings here. I'll just show you auxC. Just everything's being grabbed. The step view is better. Just everything's being grabbed from, all is being grabbed from track 6. And I'm on track 7 currently. And this is what my auxA looks like, offset auxD relative. This is what my auxB looks like. And this is what my auxC looks like. And this is my pattern. You're allowed to use my pattern to make amazing music. Go ahead. And then track 6 is just notes. Nothing else there. It's just these notes. So, have a go setting up yourself, and you'll figure out what's going on. And if you make a great track out of it, send me the track, so I can have a dance. Let's have a look at what we have going on here. You'll notice that I have a kick drum on this track here. This is track 21, even though it says 5 here, I've gone over to the next 16. And you'll notice that this track is playing some kicks, but then it mutes itself. So what's happening here? Let's have a look. So, there are my notes, just kick drum, electron rhythm playing the kicks. On auxA, I have a +1 on the first step to offset auxD relative. We know what that does, just makes a count up. But on auxB, I have the interesting one that we're going to look at. It's the last aux event in the accumulator mask menu. And this says, it's not actually a mask. What this says is, what it does, it's mute track when the accumulator auxD is greater than n. And this is the one instance where the comma doesn't mean unless, it means when. Sorry about that, but that's the way Colin did it. Blame him. So, what does this aux event do? Well, it does what you would think it does. It mutes the track once the accumulator goes over a certain number. And I've got 1 down here. So when the accumulator goes to 2, which is greater than 1, it'll mute the track. But also, it'll reset, when it mutes the track, it also resets the accumulator to 0 again. That's the interesting bit. So let's stop this. Let's unmute it so it'll play. And let's have a look at the accumulator. When we press play, goes to 1, goes to 2. This step mutes it, and the accumulator gets reset to 0. So, what can we do with that? Well, on another track here, I have this track called Unmute. And this also has an accumulator. Offset auxD relative, we know what that does. And that's going to count 1 up here. And I have a mask aux row C unless the accumulator is greater than or equal to n. And on aux row C, down here I have my unmute track. And this is going to unmute track 21, 22, 23, 24. On aux row B, it's going to wait until the accumulator is 6, 7, 8, and 9 for those particular tracks to unmute. But I have this set to random. So the accumulator is not going to go up uniformly the way we expect. It'll only go up when whatever random chance it hits this step again. So that makes it a little bit more interesting. So we'll turn on these. These are going to all mute themselves eventually because I've set up the same thing on the kick as I have on the snare, rim, and clap. And see, they've all muted themselves, but I'm going to turn them on again, and I'm going to turn this on. And they'll start randomly muting themselves after a while. These all kind of more randomly mute themselves because I've got the random direction set on these 3, and I'll do that on the kick as well to make it more interesting. Instead of just going forward, it'll go random. So we don't know exactly when it'll hit the accumulator. But they'll play for a while, then they'll mute themselves, reset their accumulator to 0. This will eventually unmute them, hopefully. Let's see if it does. Yeah, there, it unmuted the kick. wait for the accumulator to go a bit more. Ah, it's muted the other ones, but the kick muted itself again. So this is gonna keep going for a while. So what else have I got set up here? So I have to have something else set up, right? In SH101, playing a pattern there. What's going on in this SH101? Let's have a look. Nothing, just notes. However, if you look in here, you'll see there's a note accumulator. What's going on there? How's that happening? If I don't have any aux events in the row here, well, here's another thing you can do. I have a different track here, and what I'm doing is I'm redirecting the offset note relative to the track with SH101. You can redirect the accumulators to affect another track. So the offset aux note relative is here, but above it I've got redirect auxes to the track the SH101 is on. So this note accumulator doesn't go up, but the SH101 note accumulator does. And it's kind of jumping around randomly because I have this direction set to random, and on my offset note I have +1 here and -1 here. So sometimes it'll go up, sometimes it'll go down. Now you could get the same effect pretty much, I think, using a randomize, but this is just another way to do it. There's a lot of different ways to do things, and I just wanted to show an interesting way of giving an example of the mute track. So I like those ones, pretty interesting. Even though it doesn't sound like a dance floor killer in a good way, more a dance floor killer in the bad way. But that is the mute track when the accumulator of auxD is greater than n aux event. One of the obvious applications that I think a few people asked me already would be, oh, can you change the tempo with an accumulator? Yes, you can, as I am demonstrating right now. You can see the tempos going down, and also the pitch of the notes are going down, so it sounds like I'm, you know, pitching down a record. I love that effect. So what's going on here? Well, it's not very complicated, this. Over here, we have our set tempo aux events down the bottom, and it's set to 120 BPM. But I've got my offset auxD relative, and that's, don't mind the, you see the step here that says +3? That step is off, so the step that's actually working is the -3 step over here at the end. So that's making the tempo go down, but then when it gets to a certain limit that I've set, 60 I think, it resets to 120 again. And I've got one interesting thing that's new. On aux row B, do you remember our knob mask group of aux events from the previous video, which you know and love? In the knob mask, there were a lot of mask gate, mask ties, mask aux BCD. There are also ones that work on accumulators, and what they do is they let you use the knob to stop the accumulator working. And there's a couple here. There's mask the note accumulator if the knob is greater than a value, mask note accumulator if knob is near a value, mask note accumulator if knob is less than a value, and there's the same one again for velocity, the same 3 for velocity I should say, and the same 3 for the auxD accumulator. So I've got the auxD accumulator set up so if the knob value is greater than 63, it won't mask. The tempo change will work, but if I set it, let's see, so it's at 93 now, but if I turn the knob B over, it flicks to 120 straight away, and it'll stay at 120 now because the knob is masking the accumulator, stopping the accumulator working on the tempo. If I change it back, it goes back to whatever the accumulator had minused from the tempo. And also, I've got one of those working on the, where's my SH101? There it is. So I've got masked the note accumulator if the knob A value is greater than n. But I don't have it on every single step here. So when I turn A, only the steps that are active will make the note go back to its original, and you'll still hear the accumulator working on the other notes. So that makes it sound kind of interesting. If you play it around with this, you'll know what I'm talking about, but let's have a listen. That's the accumulator working on all the notes. It's only working on some of them now. For those of you listening in or at 1.5 speed. Sorry for messing with you. But the music probably sounded good there for a minute, right? Okay. What else have we got? I've got something else here that I wanted to show you. Okay, let's just, once again, just have a brief look at these. The knob mask for the accumulator. It's the same as the knob mask for the auxes and gates and ties, basically. So there's one for the notes, just shown that. One for the velocity, which I haven't shown, but it works the same as the notes. And then the auxD. And we've seen that in action. But I've one more thing. You hear the chord that's happening every so often? That's from the Nord. The Nord is grabbing the note using the inter-track note grab. It's grabbing the note from the SH101 track. However, it's grabbing the note, but it also, the note is affected by the accumulator. So normally when you select grab and you want to grab a note, what track's my SH101 on? It's on track 6. So if I put this to grab note from 6, there's a random gate mask on there. It's going to keep grabbing the note even though the accumulator is working on the SH101. It'll grab the original note. So what you want to do is you change this to grab note plus accumulator, nte+a, and that grabs the note that is affected by the accumulator. Let's put the random mask gate back on so it doesn't play all the time. And we're back at a respectable speed. These ones are a little bit complicated. So if you have trouble getting these working, what you should do is you can post on the forum and ask a question on the Sequentix forum. There's a lot of other people there who are good with these aux events, and people like experimenting with them. So people like seeing other people's examples. So if you have any problems with your accumulators, and these are the trickiest of the aux events in my opinion, don't be afraid to ask questions. You can also stick something in the comments, but it's better on the forum because it's easier to search and everything. The note grab also has a couple of other ones that apply to accumulators. There's note plus accumulator. There's velocity plus accumulator. I had to look at my notes there for a minute. There it is. This grabs the velocity and whatever accumulator values on the velocity for each of the tracks. And the last one is auxD value plus accumulator. Let's go back to the note A plus track 6. There we go. Not confusing at all, wasn't it? Of course not. There was a lot going on in that last example, so I just want to give a more simple example of the knob mask accumulator aux events. You remember the knob mask from the previous video. Just gonna have another look at it again. The accumulator ones are down here. So there's mask accumulator, mask the note accumulator, mask n accumulator, unless knob A is greater than n. So that means the note accumulator will not affect the notes until this knob A is greater than the value that I've set here. And I've set 63 for all the notes. Actually, let's make it be a little bit fancier like this. So if I start turning up the knob, the accumulator will be allowed to affect the notes. The accumulator goes up it's currently going down all the time because I've set it as at a minus. That keeps going, but the knob stops it affecting the notes, and it's going to start affecting the notes when I turn the knob this way. It's affecting some notes there, not all of them. There we go. And if I turn it right over, it's affecting all the notes now. So let's make it better slope like that. See, it only affects a few notes. That sounds pretty good. And then all the way over to 0 won't affect any of the notes. So the middle one, let's set this up to let's gang it and set it all to 63 again. And I'll show you this does is mask the note accumulator, don't let it affect the notes unless knob A is near the value I set here. And near is plus or minus 1 are the value. So it has to be 62, 63, or 64. So if I move this to 63, which is the middle, you can hear that the accumulator is now allowed to affect the notes. But if I move it anywhere else, away from 63, it's not going to work. Also, you can do, weird slopes. And whenever the knob is near one of these numbers, and we don't know, it's not exact, you can't really see on the knob, but you can kind of figure it out. There we go. So that can be interesting. That's the near, and then the last one for the note is just the opposite of the first one, which is mask the accumulator, don't let it play, unless knob A is less than n. So let's stick this at 63 again. So knob A is less than 63 now, it's 0. So it's going to let the note accumulator affect the notes. Over 63, it won't. So it also has the same tree for velocity. Not going to go through that because you can figure out velocity. It's the same deal. And it's also the same tree for the auxD accumulator. We will have a look at that now. We're now listening to the classic sounds of the Moog Mini Moog Model D. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice that the filter is being modulated slowly. Filter is opening up, filter is closing down again. How am I doing that? I've got auxD set up to send to the Mini Moog filter CV in. And I have it set up as, I've just named it VCF myself. And on auxC, I've set up offset auxD relative, which is going to add to the auxD accumulator, which adds that value to auxD. So on each of these steps, I've +1. And the way I've set it up is, you can see the accumulator, it's going down now, it goes to 0, then it goes up. Go to the config menu, auxD, limit 40, so it goes 0 up to 40, and then reverse to 0, so it goes 0, 40, back to 0 again. So that's what's happening with the accumulator, and that gets added on to my auxD, and I've set everything here to 10. So 0 to 40 is getting added to 10. So we can see this in the track control filter here. You'll see it goes 50 down to 10, hopefully, if I'm right. Yes. So the accumulator is basically acting as an LFO here for the filter, which is pretty cool. Let's go back to the pattern because I wanted to show you the knob function. Let's go to auxB, which is free, and the last of the knob mask, right down the bottom, we have mask the accumulator unless knob value is greater than n. Let's pick knob B, and I'd already set this up previously, so it's all set up to 63. So if the knob value is currently 127, I've got it right to right there. If I turn it over here so it's under 63, you'll hear the filter isn't being modulated anymore. And if we go to the track control value, look, it's stuck at 10. So we can actually move that there. But our auxD keeps sending 10, so it's going to keep resetting to 10. If I move knob B past 63, which I've set up, then it allows the accumulator to work its magic on auxD again. So there's 3 of those. There's one for knob values greater than n. There's one for knob value near n. So let's just have a look at that. So if I move this, if it gets near 63, there you go, it starts working. Then I move away from that, it stops working again. I'm just using 63 as an example, remember, just because it's easy to show. You can set any values you want here and they don't all have to be the same. We'll do that now when I show you the last one, which is mask the auxD accumulator unless knob value is less than n. So let's go here and let's put it like this. Now, we're not gonna, so if I have it right over there, we're not gonna, the accumulator is not going to be affecting the filter at all. If I move it down a little bit, it's gonna affect the filter sometimes when it gets to my higher steps. When it gets to D steps, it'll affect it, but it won't down here. That's a pretty good effect. And then the more I move it down, the more the accumulator will affect the filter. Not all the time though, but now it's even more. And then if I move it right down here, the accumulator works on the filter without being stopped. There's a little jump there. That's because I've got, oh yeah, it's just hitting 0 and then 8. So let's put these down to 0. Have a look at it. See, it's not working for the first bit and then it's working for the rest. So as always, experimentation is key. Colin even says that in the manual, and he's right. We're gonna have one more example of grabbing when there's accumulators happening. So I've got an SH101 playing here. Good old SH101, can't beat him. And I've got Minimoog set up here, and the auxD, I have note grab from track 5, which is the SH101. So the Minimoog is just going to grab the notes. And this is just a regular note grab. Ignore the one in auxC. We're just looking at auxB at the moment. We're grabbing the notes from track 5. So if and my Minimoog, and in the regular notes of the P3 pattern of the Minimoog, it's just C3 all the way. But we're not going to hear that because we're going to be... You can hear it's grabbing the notes there. I have random mask gate on auxA just to vary the gates happening, just to make it more pleasant for your ears. So auxB is grabbing the notes from track 5. So if we go to track 5, and I've got an accumulator set up here. And if I turn, I've also got the knob set up. So let's see where we're at. It's at 18. Let's start it again and turn that to the right. And so we're going to hear the SH101 go up. But the Moog track, even though it's grabbing notes from track 5, its notes are not going up because it's just grabbing the regular SH101 notes that are here. It's not grabbing them after they've been affected by the accumulator on this track. If we want to do that, there's a different grab, and it's this one here that I have on auxC. You can see the difference. It's nte+a, note plus accumulator. And as we know, the rule of the aux rows, I have this in auxC, so when I activate it, it'll win out. It'll happen after auxrow B. So here's what happens. Now, the Minimoog track is grabbing the notes from the SH101, and it's grabbing them after they've been affected by the note accumulator on the SH101 track. Now you won't see the accumulators on the Minimoog track changing. It's just getting the note information. And as well as the note plus accumulator, there's also a grab for velocity plus accumulator and auxD value plus accumulator. Now, after you've watched 4+ hours of aux events, you'll be able to figure that out yourselves, okay? You'll be able to come up with something good. I'm liking this. Okay, we've more to do though, so we can't dawdle. We're on the home stretch of accumulator expertise. There's a few more I need to show you. First one is this one. It's in the accumulator menu, down near the end. These last 5 we're going to have a look at. So the first one here of the last 5 is set note accumulator limit. So we already know. Let's unset it because that's annoying. And start this again. There we go. Let's go to the menu, accumulator config. Currently, I've set the note limit to 36 and it resets to 0. So it gets 36, it goes back to 0. We can see that happening here. The note goes up to 36, back to 0. It's the note accumulator. I've set it to +3 on each of these steps, so that's why it's gone up a bit faster than we've done previously, but sounds good. But as well as that limit in here, this limit, we can use an aux event to set the limit. So set note accumulator limit here. I load it up here, and I'm just going to set 9 in the very first value, on the very first step. See what happened there? The note accumulator now, when it gets to 9, it resets to 0. Despite the fact it still says 36 in the menu. Don't be fooled by the menu. Our aux event is now overriding that menu value. So, we set the note accumulator limit here, and we can mess around with it. As always, I'm going to now, in this row, I've offset auxD relative. And I'm going to add +4. So what's this going to do? It's going to keep adding +4. The auxD accumulator keeps going up because the limit of that is 47. So the limit of the note accumulator goes up in steps. It's an interesting effect. So it gets higher, and it's just one bar pattern doing this. This requires a bit of playing around to wrap your head around it, but you can see my settings there. offset note relative just on a couple of steps. Hit the camera there, sorry. And then offset auxD relative there, 4. And then set note accumulator limit, 9. So, as well as the set note accumulator limit, there's also a set velocity accumulator limit, works exactly the same way. And there's also the set auxD accumulator limit, which does the same thing except it works on auxD. And there's 2 final aux events in the accumulator menu. There's add the dAccumulator to length, and there's add dAccumulator to delay. We'll hear the delay one easier, more clearly actually, if I do this. And I turn them on. You hear the note. The delay is 0 for every note, so it should play on the grid, but I'm adding the accumulator value to the delay with this last aux event. And there's also one of those for length of note. The Minimoog at the moment, I've got the envelope set up so it won't really affect it, but you can play around with that yourself. That sounds quite annoying, so let's turn it off. Here we go. I believe that is all the aux events in the accumulator menu, and all the aux events in the accumulator mask menu, and all the accumulator auxes in the knob mask down here. We've done them. And in our intertrack, our grab, swap, and push, there's a couple of accumulator ones in there which we've looked at as well. I'm just counting. There's about 35 accumulator auxes, and we've gone through every single one of them. Finally, there are a couple of complications to the accumulators I have to explain to you. First of all, let's have a look at this example pattern. It's the Minimoog, and it's just all the same note, C3, but I've got an offset note relative accumulator, which is making an interesting pattern because on the first step it goes up 3 and then down 1 and then up 3 and then up 2 and then up 1 and so on. So it's going to be going up and down in an interesting fashion. There's the note accumulator there. And if we go into accumulator config, we see that the max the note will get to is 36, and it'll reset to 0 when it gets to 36, up to 36, 0, and then up again. And as well, on my aux row B, I have mask the gate unless the accumulator is greater than n. So these notes here won't play unless the accumulator is greater than those values. And we can hear that every so often. There, they didn't play there, but as the accumulator goes up, then they will play. And on auxC, we have offset auxD relative. This just is increasing the auxD accumulator there. So note accumulator is going up and auxD accumulator going up. And they're both configured differently in the menu. auxD is a limit of 34. Its mode is different. Its mode is return to 0. So it goes up to 34 and then goes down from 34 down to 0 again. It doesn't get reset instantly. And we can hear that happening because the auxD accumulator on my auxD row, I've got the filter for the Minimoog. So the filter is being slowly moved up and down, and we can see that in the track control value. There you can see the filter being affected by aux row D. But in the accumulator config menu, we have this option here, the catchily named XdAcD, and it is set to off by default. And what is this? This is disconnect auxD row from the auxD accumulator. And what that does is, if I turn that to on, which I will do now, straight away you can hear that the filter is not moving anymore. What that does is it stops the accumulator of auxD adding its value to auxRd, which is where my filter is. So now on auxRd I had it by default all the steps on, but all set to 0. So it's sending my Moog filter 0. So when I disconnect auxRd, it'll be 0. And we can see that in the track control value, it's staying at 0. So the auxRd accumulator is still going up and down, but it is not being added to auxRd. But it still works. The other accumulator auxes that grab directly from it, like this one, mask gate, unless the accumulator is greater than n. This still works if I disconnect it from auxRd. And you're thinking, why would you want to disconnect it from auxRd? Well, sometimes you might want to put something else on auxRd and have it do something else entirely, nothing got to do with accumulators, like set tempo or something fun. But you don't want it affected by the accumulator. You want that to be doing something else with your accumulator masks and so on. So that's why this option exists. But it is a bit confusing. So if it's on, the auxD accumulator, it'll still be counting up and down, but it won't add its value to auxRd. And if it is off, we hear it now, the auxD accumulator is adding its value to auxRd, which is my Moog filter. And we can see that again, the value is being added. A little bit confusing. It took me a while to get my brain around this. I didn't really understand how the auxRd and the auxRd accumulator can be separated, but they can. So once again, experimentation is the key. Play around with it. Put something strange in auxD and then practice turning it off and on. And your mind will figure out, hopefully, what's happening. There is another accumulator complication we have to look at. Apologies. Okay, so this is a pretty simple pattern. Just one note on all the steps. However, I've got offset note relative on auxRd, and it's playing +1 to the notes. So the notes are rising up, as we can see here. The note accumulator is going up, as expected. And in the accumulator config, you can see that the note will go up to 46, and then it'll reset, go right back to 0. So currently, this is normal. We know what's happening here. Everything is fine. However, I'm going to complicate things. My first thing I've done strangely, was I've put the offset note relative on auxRd. Now remember, we also have offset auxD. So if you follow, this offset auxD relative, that's gonna add to the auxRd, but my offset note relative is on auxRd. So what's gonna happen? Here's what's gonna happen. I'm just gonna +1 to offset auxRd, just one step in the pattern. Did you hear a change there? Yes. What's happening now is auxD accumulator is going up one step per bar, but that's adding a +1 to this, to everything here on auxRd, which is my offset note relative. So this means instead of going +1, +1, +1, it's now going plus auxD accumulator. So let's stop it and start it again. It's going to go +1, +2 each step, +3 each step, +4. And you can see this is jumping up bigger and bigger jumps each time. Is that exponential? Maybe it's exponential. Someone who's better at maths can figure that out. But auxRd accumulator is adding to auxRd, and on auxRd I have offset note relative. So that's what happens when you put in an accumulator on auxD, it will be affected by the auxD accumulator if you have that going as well. So I can turn off the auxD accumulator by just muting that, and if I press play, it's now working as normal. And the smart amongst you will also remember, I'll put this on again, so now it's going to be affecting it. But if I go into the accumulator config, I can disconnect the auxD accumulator from auxD, and that means that my notes are now going up as expected. This is a complicated one, I know. It took me a good while to figure out what was going on before I grasped this concept of auxD disconnecting from itself and affecting what's on auxD, the accumulator, and what happens when you put an accumulator on auxD that is being accumulated as well. So, play around with this. If you have an accumulator on auxD, strange stuff will happen. Just remember that. Have a look at your numbers. Try disconnecting it and seeing if that helps. If you're having trouble with your accumulator pattern and you don't know what's going on. It's a little bit complicated, I know. Let's just have a look. I've got offset auxD relative just +1 on one step. And it's going down now because I've got it to reverse to 0. But we'll just stop and start to make everything reset. You see the note will jump up. Pretty sure it's exponential, but don't quote me on that. So, that's what happens when you put an accumulator on auxD. Strange stuff can happen if you're also accumulating auxD. One other accumulator complication we have to look at, there's quite a few of them. Apologies for that. It's not my fault technically, but I'm going to explain them to you. So, what we're going to look at now is in the accumulator config. Remember these things at the end, rclip? I left them alone most of the time, but we're going to have to look at it now, unfortunately. So first of all, what have I got going here? I've got offset auxD relative with just 1 on first step, so it's counting up every step. Now it's stuck at 20 because if we look in here, my accumulator limit is 20 and my mode is clip, which means when it gets to the limit, it just stays at the limit. So if I stop the pattern and start it, you see accumulator 2 is counting up. It'll go up to 20 and then it'll stay at 20. And what's it doing? Well, I have a set last step absolute on auxD, and I have a 8 here. So when the pattern starts, the pattern will play 8 steps, but the accumulator will add 1 to it, so it'll then play 9 steps and then 10 and then 11, and it'll keep going. Now, the maximum the value of last step absolute can be is 16, which is one whole pattern. So this will keep playing, and the pattern's now at 16, which is the longest the last step absolute can go to, the highest figure can go. So it'll just play the whole of this bar. So even though the accumulator goes up further, it's adding more because my last step absolute is set to 8 originally, so it's adding more to it. The value of the last step absolute stays at 16. It can't go any higher to 16. But if we go to the accumulator config and we change rclip, there's 2 options, rclip and rwrap. And what will happen now is the last step absolute value, when it gets to 16, when the value gets to 16, instead of just staying at 16, it will go back to 1. See? The pattern was at 16 and then it went to 1 step, and now it's getting longer again. So just to explain again, it's the last step absolute value that goes to 16, and then that gets wrapped around to 1 when more gets added to it by the accumulator. by default, that's set to clip. So when it gets to 16, it'll just stay at 16, the last step absolute value. So 13, 14, 15, 16. That's the maximum value of last step absolute. And you can see it's staying at 16. The pattern plays to 16 every time. But if I change this to wrap, and we play it again, go to 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, but went to 1, now it's 2, now it's 3, now it's 4. The value got wrapped around. That's what that wrap does. Just wraps the value of whatever aux is on auxD. Now, I haven't been able to get it to wrap properly. If you go into the accumulator config, you can also see there's the same options for notes and velocity. The problem is, the highest value of last step absolute is 16. The highest step of note is 127. So I haven't been able to get it to wrap properly past 127. I have to research that a bit more. It's one thing I'm not 100% on. Even I don't know everything about the Cirklon. But the wrap thing, most of the time I don't really use it that much. So I'm fine most of the time to leave that at its default, which is clip, and nothing unexpected happens then. But have a play around. You might get some interesting results. Like everything, play around enough and you'll figure it out, and you'll come up with some great musical idea. We have one very last aux event to look at. It doesn't actually have anything to do with accumulators. This is one that was requested by somebody in the YouTube comments. They wanted me to talk about NRPN. So what is NRPN? Basically, it's a way to address more control destinations than you have with MIDI-CC. With MIDI-CC, you have 0 to 127. And if you have a very fancy synth, it might have NRPN, and you can send control messages to NRPN addresses as well. And I'll show you how it works. You go to, let's just go backwards here. There we go. So we're in our Moog 1 pattern here, and we go to, I'm just going to set it back to MIDI-CC first, and we're going to go in again. And the NRPN is in MIDI send NRPN. So I had to look in the instruction manual, heaven forbid, of the Moog to find out that the NRPN for the state variable filter for the first of its 3 multi-timbral synths, I suppose, is M7L54. So dial this in. There, you can hear already. auxD is now sending, it's like MIDI-CC basically, it's sending to the filter. It's pretty simple. Don't know why I put it off so long, but that is the NRPN aux event. Like the MIDI-CC, you can send it messages from other aux events. I'm randomizing it with auxC here, with randomize auxD. And that is the end of this video. We've covered every single aux event, which is pretty amazing, if I don't say so myself, because there's 118 of them. So you should be a pro by now. Oh, before we go, there's one other new shortcut I wanted to show you. You remember you're going to delete everything in the pattern. You go delete pattern, then you hit enter, and this will delete all the values. But the problem is it deletes all the, sometimes you don't want all the values deleted, you just want, say, the notes deleted, or you just want aux row. So I'm just talking about if there's values like this. Let's mess it up here. Okay, so just say you want to delete all those on aux row C. Well, now you can. There's a delete row. So you go to the row you want, auxC, hold down delete, press the row button, and look, new menu. Do I want to confirm row clear? Yes, I do. It doesn't remove my aux that I've loaded there. I've loaded aux no relative, but it just clears all the values inside. So that's nice and quick. And I went into the accumulator menu there. It's force a habit now. So let's do that again. Just going to add values here. Delete row. Delete. There we go. And it also works on lengths. Just say I had different lengths here. Delete row. Delete. Lengths are all reset to a quarter of a step. Same with velocity. Same with just the notes. Delete row. Delete all the notes. So that's a useful shortcut. Delete row. That's it from me. Good luck with the music. I'll be posting some auxVent examples. They won't be hours long though, they'll just be short ones. I'll be posting other stuff, don't worry. There's still more things to go through as well in the Cirklon, not just aux events. There's a bit more to cover. We'll get through everything. And that's it from me for today.